Welcome back to Sonic Speed Reading. Today we're going to be doing things a little differently. I will once again quickly summarize the last issue we haven't covered, that being issue 68, but when I say speed reading, I really mean it this time. I do want to talk about a couple things here and there from this issue, but I'm actually going to be using this as a jumping off point to talk about a much broader subject. Has IDW Sonic grown stale? It's a critique I have seen thrown around here and there, and while I am a big fan of this book and the ridiculous talent who put it together, it's something I personally have felt as well. So I like to discuss why that is and what I hope can be done about it, if anything even needs to be done about it. But for issue 68 itself, this is just a fun little adventure with Sonic and Tails where they go out with the intention of both finding a Chaos Emerald and testing out the modifications on the Yellowtail Extreme gear. The Yellow-Orange War rages on even in Tails' equipment. But we not only get a nod to the Rider games, we also get a nod to early 3D Sonic level design as Sonic and Tails do an oopsie and end up losing control and falling into a bottomless pit. Which, alright, it's not all that bottomless. They end up in a cave system which leads them into this unique little ecosystem filled with vegetation and a glowing river where we see a little salamander splash into. Wonder if that's going to be important. I doubt it's a reference, but this does remind me of an episode of Sonic Sat AM where an underground environment was sustained by some magical green liquid. Oh, and this giant salamander reminds me of the bio lizard. Yeah, I guess that's a bit of a problem. The rest of the issue revolves around Sonic and Tails dealing with this giant salamander. The conflict ending when Tails takes notice to how the animal is reacting. It's not really on the offense, it's clearly in a more defensive stance. They realize the salamander is just protecting its home, so Sonic attempts to communicate with it, saying that he will leave the Chaos Emerald here if the salamander wishes that, but he also explains that somebody will come for it. Simply having the emerald here puts the salamander's home in danger. Sonic promises to keep the emerald safe and in turn keep this ecosystem safe as well. Well, it's clear the salamander understands what Sonic is saying as it moves a rock aside to let the duo out. And that's it. That's the story. This, as you might have noticed, feels like a strange departure from the ever-growing danger present at Restoration HQ, if you have been paying attention to that storyline anyway. After all, this has been called the Misadventures arc, which has been more about random little adventures and these interactions between specific characters. All of them do have little connections to each other, and that could be the case here. This does feel like a standalone story, but we haven't seen the Emerald since the end of the Metal Virus, and considering how important those things are, I'm sure this will come into play at some point down the road. And outside of that, as always, there's some fun speculation on my end simply from this comic. Was that little salamander the same as the giant one we saw just a few panels later? Or did that little one just represent the effect of this glowing liquid on the fauna? Tails does explain that the salamander is huge, so clearly that's not the standard size. Again, we see the little salamander right there, clearly representing how big they're actually supposed to get. But then again, this world also has giant turtles, giant snakes, giant frogs. We have seen all of those in games, and all that makes me wonder, did the Chaos Emerald cause this reaction in the ecosystem? Is emerald energy causing this river to glow, and in turn, is it causing the salamander to mutate? And in a broader sense, have the giant versions of animals we've seen scattered throughout the games been the result of Chaos Emerald energy in the world? I don't know if it was ever meant to spiral out that much. It was just a fun thought experiment for me. Ultimately not that important. I just thought it was kind of cool if we had a super salamander here. Oh wait, is that an Archie reference? But again, outside of that, that's basically the issue. I am of course doing a massive disservice to the characterization, the dialogue, action, page layout, every aspect of the art. I always recommend reading it if you can. I do spend a lot of time summarizing, but I never want to be a replacement for reading the material yourself. And in turn, this conversation is really meant for folks who have been keeping up with the book, because I'm seeing a critique forming around the series. Put simply, it's just getting boring. And while it was lovely to have a good old-fashioned Sonic and Tails adventure, for a good long while, things have felt pretty aimless. Yes, they are hinting at a larger scheme with Clutch and all the villains he's planted in the Restoration HQ, and even though I do love these more intimate moments where these characters can interact, there isn't much here that makes me desperate to pick up the next chapter the moment it releases. And keep in mind, I get review copies of this stuff. I get it for free and I get it quite early. I already get a heads up from a lot of other folks, and I am forever grateful for IDW for supplying that to me. And when I do read this stuff, I can always find something I enjoy. But more often than not, when it comes to this series nowadays, I kind of think to myself, I'll get to it when I get to it. I mean, issue 68 has existed for at least, 4 months now? And I just haven't felt compelled to read the thing. Even though I have a show called Sonic Speed Reading, what really was here for us to break down and examine? A Chaos Emerald causes an amphibian to grow? They might use a Chaos Emerald later? Neat. So I do want to explore this problem a little further. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do think things have grown a little stale. And I think that comes from the pacing, my own expectations, obvious corporate restrictions, being so closely tied to game canon, and, well, the comic industry in general. Let's break it down. So when the book first kicked off, there was a lot of excitement around it. A lot of fans from the Archie series were super hyped that Ian, Evan, and a lot of the team who helped make the long-standing series actually, good, were going to carry their talents forward into this new series. And for Sonic fans, new and old, it kicked off fairly strong. The games carried most of the backstory, but things felt fresh enough that new fans could jump in without any problem, focusing on a new character with each new issue, solving a problem while ramping up the mystery of Eggman attacks, even though Eggman was around and with amnesia, all leading to a pseudo-sequel of Sonic Heroes in comic form. A really fun way to reintroduce characters without any Archie baggage, while introducing new characters who felt right at home with these long-standing animal people, all while ramping up to an awesome villain battle while mixing in long-standing staples of the series, but mixing them up in fresh ways. We got Angel Island and the Master Emerald back in the mix, super forms were established, but only in the form of Burning Blaze and Super Neo Metal Sonic. We didn't jump straight to Super Sonic, we instead gave that form to an obscure version of Metal Sonic, so it gave us two really cool ideas and mixed them up together in a way we had never seen before. They made a fun story that made you say, man, I wish I saw that in a video game. That's when Sonic comics were at their best, when the story captured what made those games so fun and translated that energy into the comic medium. And the same can be said, granted with a drastically different tone, with the following arc, the Metal Virus Saga. But unfortunately, while this story is considered one of the best narratives ever seen in any Sonic comic, I also feel like this story is the major reason why the book simply doesn't have the same traction today. I mentioned this back when I covered the Metal Virus. It's one of the most emotionally intense stories I've ever seen in the Sonic series. No, it never resorts to blood and gore or permanent deaths, but it brings our heroes to their lowest points and it leads to some real standout moments that these characters don't often get. And while a lot of fans at the time felt this story dragged on way too long, I think it lasted like a year and a half and it also went on a hiatus thanks to an actual global pandemic. With hindsight, spending this long with the virus really made the event feel that much more serious. It was so overwhelming. And even if you knew that there would eventually be a happy ending, it just made the victory that much sweeter. Yes, I know you don't like how Shadow was handled. I get it, it wasn't perfect, but overall, it was a great story. But it was only the second major story of this book in an empty world with barely established characters. They were on the page long enough to hit you hard in the heart. Yes, Ian's a good writer, but so much of this book largely requires you to already be a Sonic fan. You've already had adventures with these guys elsewhere, be it in the previous comic series or in the games. That's why I've always said the Metal Virus, as good as it is, would have worked much better in the established or even the drastically re-established universe of Archie Sonic, where they had varied, thoroughly defined cultures, societies, characters, and, well, frankly, more dynamic relationships between those characters. I mean, for crying out loud, just look at the Mecha Sally arc. That was just one robot, but it showed the impact she had on her friends and the world of Mobius. But I didn't need to go elsewhere to see that impact. This story is great on its own terms because, well, it's a part of a greater narrative. Archie Sonic had been going on for years and years and years, and this story paid off so much of the world and narrative building within Archie Sonic. I understood how important Sally was not only to Sonic, which already was a big deal, but also to Amy, Tails, Knuckles, the Freedom Fighters, her family. It just worked so well here. But again, they took their time to get to this point. I understand that the metal virus was just a twinkle in the eye for Ian at this point. I know he didn't have much, if any of it, formed. I don't think he had any of it down on paper yet. But you can still tell the writer who kept the momentum going through the Atom arc, Knuckles Enerjack, the Iron Dominion, the return of Eggman and the Death Egg, Mecha Sally, hell, even the reboot remix of Unleashed. You can tell that same momentum carried through to IDW with the metal virus. But if you were brand new to Sonic comics or the Sonic series in general, this is the tone they set for nearly 2 years worth of stories. A lot of folks' first introduction to Sonic comics was a zombie apocalypse. Somebody's first experience with Cream the Rabbit was during a zombie outbreak. That's how early this event was. Cream was introduced during this arc. That's crazy. So if you're a new fan, who can blame you if you thought this set the expectation going forward for this fresh comic series? God, if they're kicking off this hard, what do they have cooking? What's next? Where do you go from here? Well, they changed up head writers and decided to slow way the hell down. And you know what? That makes sense. You gotta let things simmer. I mean, just look at Dragon Ball Z. Yes, there are big stories, but there's a little downtime in between all of that. But there's always forward momentum. And the series took a drastically different turn and has never quite reached that same momentum again. Don't get me wrong, there are some incredible stories that happen after the metal virus, but I couldn't even tell you what the format of the book is. It started off trying to be shonen manga epic, but it will also spend half a year being a slice of life style story. All of it is quality in some way or another, but it's not consistent. I think that's a problem for new and old fans. New fans are going to expect this book to be this specific thing and then get something entirely different. And fans coming in from Archie, you know, the fans that championed these creators coming to IDW, I imagine a lot of them were hoping for the same momentum and same character depth that was allowed in Archie. And we saw hints of that with the intensity of the metal virus, but since then, well, it feels like this book has been declawed. And I think that's largely thanks to the fact that it's now canon to the games. You gotta remember, early on, that was still up in the air, at least what we knew as fans. But now that it's set in stone, I think that's a major contributing factor to this becoming a bit bland. Again, that's not to say there aren't some amazing moments or characters. I love Belle, Surge, and Kit, and they've explored some really fun ideas. But there's not much here that has the same lasting impact. And the really cool stuff is handed off to miniseries. Bad Guys, Imposter Syndrome, even freaking Scrabnik Island. That starred Sonic and Tails. Why wasn't that mixed into the main series? I love all those stories, don't get me wrong, but why is the main book spending 3 months putting out a forest fire? I mean, the urban warfare story had a lot of potential, but you can almost see where they're scared to let it drag on as long as the metal virus. They kind of rushed to that ending a little bit quickly, I felt. I wish they explored this more. Give the city a little more character. It's a really cool idea. It's full of fake giant emeralds. It's self-sustaining. It's growing on its own. It managed to overwhelm Sonic and pals. I thought it would have been cool if they kept Sonic injured and needing to stay stealthy. I would have loved to spend more time in that particular scenario. And maybe that new Diamond Cutter squad formed without the help of Sonic there. Maybe they formed in order to rescue Sonic. That would have been amazing. He had just finished up saving the world. It would have been cool if the rest of the cast was allowed to save him instead, all while he's allowed to explore his other skills when speed isn't an option. And who knows, maybe that was something they could have done. Maybe they were sick of an injured Sonic. I mean, Scrapnik Island also did that. I still had fun with it for what it is, but there are a lot of elements going on here, and I don't think all of them were thoroughly explored. There's a portal that phases some of the characters out of physical space, and that just kind of sorts itself out. The shadow androids are back. Team Dark is there for some reason. All of it's cool, but they just sort of rush towards an end. And yeah, maybe it wasn't going to have the same impact as the metal virus, but there was a lot here to potentially let that be the next big thing for this series. I don't know. Regardless of what I feel like they could have done better, that did show me that they still have some awesome ideas ready to go. My worry has never been with the writers or the artists themselves. My bigger concern is the restrictions they have on the the stories they're allowed to tell. For a while, I thought it was really cool that these comics were in the same universe as the video games. This would be a great space to expand on ideas that have never been properly answered by the video games. That's something that Sonic X did for the adventure games, and while I will give praise to the Freedom Fighters, it was nice to have something a little bit more in line with the video games. I didn't get a whole lot of that when I was a kid with the other Sonic mediums. And as we've seen with some of these stories, some of the miniseries, and I think especially with the comics that take place in the classic era, they do explore those concepts. They do answer questions that fans have always asked, and they expand on ideas from the games. And for those reasons, I love that they are canon to the games. But as for the main series nowadays, I'm really kind of wishing it was its own canon, because now this is simply supplemental material to the video games. Archie Sonic had some really low lows, but I will still say the very best Sonic stories ever told were in that book, because they were allowed to do their own thing. Yes, Sega came in and added more restrictions down the road, but it was still a little bit more free than what IDW is, because now that these comics are canon to the games, well, the best stories don't happen on the page. They happened elsewhere, and these stories just have to back the games up and stay way the hell away with whatever canon Sega of Japan wants to put together. We have to wait for a video game to drop, and this comic has to do everything in its power not to step on its toes. And like I've said plenty of times before, I don't even think the folks managing Sonic at the highest level have a clear vision for the Hedgehog anyway. Again, I think these smaller slice of life stories focused on a couple of characters that rarely get any time to interact elsewhere has been very pleasant for longtime fans who love that stuff. It brings some dimension and humanity in places the games have never bothered with. But I would say fans of that stuff are also big fans of shipping, and they can't really do anything on that front either. We can't even talk about crushes. We can only hint at a little bit of a crush when we see Blaze blushing when Sonic holds her hand for a second. I mean, yeah, say what you want about the crazy romantic drama from Archie, but at least that was compelling. At least that's something. I do like a lot of the stuff I'm seeing in IDW, don't get me wrong, and I love that the canon backs this stuff up. I love that these newer comic characters have a chance to shine instead of being ignored by Sega of Japan again. It was great seeing Mecha Sonic and Mecha Knuckles again. I love that we're getting answers to very obscure questions. And it's not like I'm a huge fan of things when they go too far off the rails. I've been very vocal with how much I dislike the new Knuckles show. It's more of a vehicle for Adam Pally than it is a celebration of the title character. And some of the worst Sonic stories ever told, again, are in Archie, and they are when Sega had zero oversight over that stuff. They just didn't care. But I think it's obvious that comes down to the talent and their intent. I'd love to see what Evan, Ian, and all those guys could do if they had a bit more wiggle room to work with, because I have seen what they can do when they aren't so restricted. Evan Stanley's fan comic is incredible, and I'd love to cover it here if you guys love to see it. And I really need to get to Archie Sonic because I keep singing the praises of late Archie when Ian was in charge of that, and I'm telling you guys, that stuff was really special. So I understand if you think I'm a bit of a hypocrite, but my problem with the Knuckles show is that there isn't enough Sonic, and my problem with IDW nowadays is that it plays it way too safe. There is a middle ground, and that's where the comic format works against the book itself. Yes, this is the most talented group of people behind any Sonic comic, but the comic is still a product, one that's become more expensive than ever before in a format that's not super popular nowadays, and one that was originally designed to be cheap and disposable. They last for a few minutes of reading, and then you have to wait an entire month for the next few minutes of reading. And that becomes a lot harder in a world where we are bombarded with all kinds of entertainment, and if you're only engaging with comics at all because you're only interested in this one thing, then you need engaging stories to get people to come back month after month. And this book just has not been doing it for me. The latest arc is called Misadventures. They're just random little stories that are barely connected. And then you guys put the book on pause for nearly 5 months? You guys have been meandering in downtime for almost a year now. And then you expect your readership to come back after a quarter of the year has passed? Why? So you can give the Fang miniseries room to breathe? That's happening in the classic era. We can handle 2 comics in 1 month. Why aren't these releasing consecutively? They have different writers and artists working on them. Archie had 2 Sonic comics happening because there was just too much story to tell. I swear they're only doing this because this has to be an issue with sales. That's my only guess. IDW can't justify budgeting 2 Sonic comics happening at the same time. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know how this works, but that's how this reads to me. And I'm sorry, but the seasonal specials really aren't helping matters either. They're cute for what they are. There's some great art, great references, great humor, but none of them are leaving a lasting impact. Why do we need seasonal specials? It's all the same tame, mundane stuff that doesn't leave a lasting impact. That's where the downtime should be, in those specials, in the annuals. Give us a compelling hook from month to month in the main series. Right now, everything just feels like the annuals. And again, I can find a lot to love in those stories, but it's not making me hyped to see what happens next. I understand that this is an all-ages book, but I'm also kind of tired of pretending that this franchise hasn't been around for 30 years. There are older fans, and I'm sorry, older fans usually read comic books more often than kids nowadays. But again, that's not to say that you can't make this for kids as well, because we saw all of this work just fine with Archie. And even if this is considered a kid's comic, kids media matters. This is gonna be a kid's very first comic book. Make them fall in love with the franchise. Make them fall in love with comic books. Try to say something with your comic. They can handle it. I'm sorry to keep bringing back Archie, but again, that's the point of comparison here. That's what brought me back every month. Sonic was allowed to have a family. He was allowed to explore relationships. He was allowed to screw up like actual teenagers. It was at least trying to say something. Yes, the comic-born characters in IDW are allowed to do a bit more, and they have had really interesting ideas for them, but even those guys are growing a little stale to me. I'm so sick and tired of Whisper crying at the drop of a hat. I understand her tragedy, I understand her backstory, I understand that Tangle can help her open up, but for God's sakes, she's a battle-hardened soldier. And the new villains so far have been fairly one-note. The best new bad guy they had, they've killed off. So yeah, never mind, I guess death does have a lasting impact in IDW. And I think it was important for Starline to die, but again, there's not much there to fill that void. And a large part of what made Starline so compelling was his near fourth wall breaking goal of breaking the status quo of Sonic and Eggman. These are status quo characters, they have to remain this one thing. I understand that. They are corporate mascots for a children's franchise. But at least they were asking the question. At least they are questioning Sonic's morals. At least they are questioning why the Mad Doctor and the Hedgehog have this silly song and dance. It's frustrating that they don't have any real compelling answer to those questions. They just end up killing the guy off, but it still sparked up engaging conversations. I feel like that was the best part of the Metal Virus. It was Eggman at his most evil, and it was Sonic and his philosophy pushed to their absolute limit. Granted, they wouldn't let it go afterwards and it got a little obnoxious, but still! This is a problem with long-standing superheroes in general if you read them long enough. Trust me, people have been asking why Batman doesn't kill long before that question was thrown onto Sonic. And no matter how many times they try to explore or justify it in the comic book, it's never a satisfying answer. But that's a conversation for a different time. My point is, any forward progression will inevitably revert back to the status quo. Unless, of course, something happens that's generally beloved by the fan base. Dick Grayson has been Nightwing longer than he's been Robin, for instance, but poor Peter Parker is once again broke and single. But hey, he at least got to explore marriage. He at least got to be a successful scientist. And at the very least, there are other comic books out there that allow him to stay married, so fans of that idea can continue to explore that idea. And you have so many different ways to experience that one character. There isn't just one comic out there that has to adhere to whatever Marvel movies are out at the time. Just look at my beloved Ninja Turtles. They've had so many different interpretations. They always have. One of them is a comic published by IDW in its own continuity, doing its own thing, interpreting these long-standing characters in different interesting ways. And that's been going on for 150 issues. You don't get to that number by simply existing as supplemental material for another medium. You get there there by telling the best damn story you're capable of, and the results will speak for themselves. Speaking of, I'm pretty sure the Turtles have had comics directly tied to whatever cartoon was on TV, and none of those comic series lasted all that long. That's generally the case for any comic adaptation trying to be a little extra canon to some other form of media. I think the only outlier I can think of in that case would be Simpsons comics. Pretty sure those are still being produced, right? I don't know. I just know they're on store shelves. I've never read them. But anyway, yeah, nothing's off the table for the Turtles. Look at Venus. This character was so reviled, it split up the two original creators of the Ninja Turtles for a very long time. The fan base hated this character, and they took her and turned her into one of the most compelling parts of IDW Turtles. And going off from there, IDW has gotten the rights to republish old Archie TMNT stories. There's Archie Turtles action figures. They have a comic based off the 1987 Turtles cartoon, and even that is allowed to interact with the other versions of the cartoon Turtles out there. And they're releasing a special comic for the 40th anniversary of the series that has creators from all eras making stories celebrating the entire history of the Turtles. Yes, that includes the 2K3 Turtles. There are 3 things, 4, maybe more, that feature entirely different turtle canons, and nobody has a problem with it. But you're not going to get that with the Freedom Fighters. We're never going to see those Archie stories ever again. We'll be lucky if the Sonic Boom version of the characters are ever allowed to interact with any other versions of Sonic characters. Fleetway Sonic? Forget about it. Gone forever. But no, you're right. Probably going to get more Wade Whipple. Oh boy. Actually, you know what? Screw that idea. I don't even want to deny fans of Wade Whipple. No, I'm not a fan of the show, but I want everybody to eat. When they finally wrap up these movies, I still want you guys to celebrate what you love, because at least that's something different. Sticking so close to canon can be a good thing. It can help flesh out and explore characters in their downtime and link up a lot of this old history. But we also have Tales Tube doing exactly that, and again we have those classic stories also doing the same thing, hitting my nostalgia in the right way, but how often do we need that? Scrapnik Island works as well as it does because it's not just being nostalgic, it's continuing the story. It's a fun concept on its own terms. That's a very easy thing for a new reader to just jump into. That's a cool way to be introduced to Mecha Sonic for the first time. It's cool enough that it makes you want to go back and look at his history. And for old fans like me, it's awesome to finally see that character allowed to be explored in a narrative. So in that sense, canon works just fine, but it only works because it's pushing the story forward. It was a bold move to bring Mecha Sonic back and redeem him, make him unique, make him a good guy. So yeah, don't get me wrong, there are elements of the comic that are adhering to the canon in ways that I think are pretty cool. But again, that's largely found in those classic stories or in some of these mini-series. But what's left for the main series? They get to be the furthest point in the canon. But God forbid you don't like the characterization of this kind of Sonic, and you somehow have to make sense of this tying in with the canon of Sonic Prime and the games. Where's Sage? She survived, I think. They rewrote the ending to the game they released. Don't get on me about the after credit cutscene. I don't care. They rewrote the ending to the game. That's how confident Sega is in their own storytelling, folks. So the comic can't get too far ahead of the games because God forbid if they manage to contradict them in any way, and anything cool they could potentially do, they have to make sure it's undone by the time the next game rolls around. You can't make a huge impact in the life of these characters. You can't expect a massive shift in how this world functions. And if you do add new characters, you have to justify why they don't suddenly exist in the games. Comic story stakes can never be all that high unless you're a comic-born character. And even then, there are a lot of jerk fans who don't take those characters seriously because, again, they're not showing up in the games. Even if they are considered official canon. It's not like Sega's helping them all that much. Cool, they get to show up in the mobile games, but Sega doesn't even treat those nicely either. Look, I'm mostly venting my frustrations here. I know I'm stumbling over my own thoughts a bit. I am being a little hypocritical here and there. I'm already seeing flaws in my own arguments, and I'm sure I'll see even more in the comments. Everyone gets so mad at me when I compare this series to Archie Sonic. Well, folks, I hate to break it to you, but I'm an old dude. I have consumed this stuff for a long time, so yeah, I like some of these characters. I coined the term simp monk. If you don't want comparisons, then find another channel. I'm sorry. So much of Sonic media nowadays takes so much from early Sonic media, and those parallels are not always meant to be a critique. Sometimes it just warms my heart because I know that's the most I'm ever gonna get from those old series. And I don't even need those characters back, not really. I just want to see the level of quality and storytelling I have seen from these writers, because I know they are not the problem. We will go over Ian's run in Archie Sonic. We will go over Evan Stanley's fan comics. They are incredible storytellers. They are not the problem. At least I don't think so. I don't know how the comics are made, but I would bet you money it comes down to what they're restricted to. Yes, I understand it's a corporate mascot. It has to adhere to certain rules, but even understanding why this is the way it is doesn't make it a better product. What I see is some of the most talented people Sega has ever had working on the Sonic franchise not allowed to really stretch their creative muscles. That's what I see here, and ultimately that's what I want them to work on. When the series comes back, I really hope they hit the ground running. The Mystery Racer thing looks interesting. Hope there's something really big brewing with Clutch's plot. I hope they give the comic villains a real chance to shine. But more than all that, I really hope these creators can just be allowed to play a little bit more with the toys that Sega already has access to. Be brave. You have amazing storytellers working on this book. Let them do what they do best. They won't hurt the brand. They'll just strengthen it. Tell the best possible stories you can, and that will get folks interested in your games, your cartoons, and your movies. And if you do the same for the games, the cartoons, and the movies, that is what will create brand synergy, not some confusing canon. I'm not asking for anything impossible, and yes, while I will always say they should be allowed to play with whatever character from whatever continuity they have, Ken Penders be damned, it's not that big of a deal. It's Sega. They can work on it. They can figure it out if they cared. I believe you can get a little bit more out there while staying true to the spirit of the brand. This is not rocket science. Explore these amazing characters in ways only possible in this medium, and just make a damn fun comic that works amazingly if you're already a fan, if you love these characters, but also works just fine if you've never picked up a controller before. Because Sonic comics are important, and most of them are not even legally available to you, and that's insane. Fleetway and Archie lasted as long as they did for a reason. No, they weren't always the best stories ever told, but man, you guys are missing out on such an important part of that history. That's why I started the series, and you know what? If I'm being this frustrated with IDW, I think it's about time I finally get my ass in gear and cover those stories so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And if you don't want to wait around for me, there are now other content creators out there talking about how crazy those stories got at the worst of times and how wonderful they got at the best of times. I'm far from the first to discuss that. You of course have Ian Waffles and Low Art working on those stellar Archie Sonic videos. I'm pretty sure there's a whole podcast dedicated to Sonic the comic. I've not explored that myself. And I know Mega Beatman has been out there earnestly covering Sonic comics long before I ever did. Criminally undersubbed, by the way. Go check him out. I understand that a lot of this rant sounds like I'm just trying to turn this into something that I miss. And you know what? A part of that is true. But I'm not trying to gatekeep. I'm not trying to tell you that you're wrong for liking a certain thing. I'm just saying that this could be so much more. And I want you guys to share that excitement that I had. And I'm so sick and tired of comics being an afterthought, especially with Sonic. They broke records with this stuff. Yeah, I know, this became less about the current state of IDW Sonic and just my problem with canon and preserving the legacy of Sonic comics in general. I'm sorry, this stuff gets me fired up. And believe it or not, as heated as I sound, I still love IDW Sonic. I genuinely do. This one topic just snowballed into something much bigger. A lot of things I've been holding on to for a while, a lot of things that reawakened after I saw the Knuckles show. I will be talking about that very soon. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just tired of saying this is fine the way it is, especially when I know that it can be so much more, because those amazing stories in the past are why why they hired the people they have now. The fans deserve better stories, these characters deserve better stories, and the creators deserve the chance to really show off what they can do. I'm so sick and tired of people complaining about this or that project and laying all the blame on one writer like they have all the control in the world. That's never the case with this stuff. Aim higher. I promise you, those decisions are made on a higher level. But hey, if you're fine with things the way they are, I also understand that fine. Nothing here is genuinely egregiously bad, outside of the Knuckle Show. But if you're having a good time, if you're enjoying these stories, heck, if you're even enjoying the TV show that I despise, then you know what? Good for you. This stuff is made to be enjoyed. I'm just one grumpy old man who gets way too passionate about this stuff. End of the day, that's what we're all here for. We love this stuff, and you're never wrong for enjoying what you enjoy. But hey, I'm always open to a healthy debate. If you have a different opinion than me, please let me know. If you agree, let me know. If you want to expand on any points I made, let me know. But for now, I hope this series rights the ship. I hope this rant becomes irrelevant immediately. And even if it's not, I'm still gonna read this, and I'm still gonna enjoy it, and if it ended suddenly, I would desperately miss it. I love IDW Sonic, but I don't think it's reached its full potential. But it has everything it needs to once again lead the charge. Be the comic book that shows the rest that licensed IP properties can work in this medium. And even if you don't vibe with the games, you will still see something worthwhile in Sonic the Hedgehog.